People have, especially in the think tank space, really built their entire careers around getting this war kicked off. I mean, that is their entire objective of their careers. And this is everything. If they fail, their career is over. I've had Iranian state media reach out to me and say, would you come on our TV? Well,
I'm not, just FYI, I have nothing to do with Iranian state media. They hate my guts too. Just
FYI. I mean, my answer was absolutely not. Yeah. I don't agree with anything you do. I think you're a terrible regime that slaughters their own people, and it is wildly corrupt.
That was Brett Erickson. He's a geopolitical analyst at Obsidian Risk Advisors, and he'll be on the show a little bit later today. I am Borzou Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at Borzou, BORZOU.substack.com. I'm also on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. By the time you get this, it will be Monday, June 1st. Really great show today. First, with regard to the Iran war, it looks like we've gone from 3 to 4 days to 2.5 years, 2.5 more years. That's what Mark Dubowitz said. He's the leader of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and that's like this pro-Israel think tank that has a lot of influence in Washington. Like, one of their analysts will tweet something on a Thursday, and then on a Friday, it'll become the Trump administration's policy. Sometimes it seems like the Trump administration has basically handed off its Middle East policies to this particular group and like-minded people around this clique of individuals. This circle includes a few Iranians as well, mostly supporters of Reza Pahlavi. He's the son of the former king of Iran. These people were among the people who were assuring the Trump administration that the war would last only a few days. As soon as they killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and a few key leaders, the regime would collapse, and people would start cheering the Americans as they took over and install Pahlavi or whoever, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad perhaps, as the leader of the country. Then it became a few more weeks, just a few more weeks. Then it became a few more months, just a few more months. Then it became perhaps the end of this year that the regime will collapse. And now this guy is saying, and I'm going to put up this tweet here, he's saying at the end of 2028. So that means 2.5 years, yet another forever war. Luckily, Donald Trump is just temperamentally not capable of staying engaged in anything for that long. And he's trying to negotiate his way out of this, escape from Iran, but not without his ego. And for now, he's playing the diplomacy game, but not extremely well. There's lots of give and take, lots of contradictory messaging, and so on. And I spoke about the latest developments extensively during several interviews with India's NewsX World over the weekend. Why don't we listen in?
Pakistan Foreign Minister meets Senator Rubio in Washington. Both leaders focus closely on Iranian influence and potential security threats affecting stability. Mr. Daragahi, what's your take on whether or not this will essentially help to smoothen the process with regards to the memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran?
Any effort helps. This memorandum of understanding, there's a lot of claims about it. Iranians have their claims about what it says. The Americans have their claims about what it says. And we won't really know what the final agreement will be until it is finally disclosed. I think it is interesting, though, and you didn't mention this, but Donald Trump recently issued a Truth Social post that was rather conciliatory and appeared to say that Iran and the U.S. were close to a deal, and that's on a Friday afternoon. Usually this is around the time when he starts talking up the war fears and so on. So I think that that is kind of interesting, that bit of news right now. As for whether Pakistan could play a important role in this, it already has played an important role, and it has managed to bolster its diplomatic profile, and it has done that by sucking up to the Trump administration when it could, even though it had a lot of legitimacy problems, and maintaining somewhat decent and cordial relations with Iran throughout. It just sort of shows the advantages of having a multipolar foreign policy as opposed to aligning your country with one axis.
U.S. President Donald Trump has outlined sweeping conditions linked to a possible agreement with Iran. focusing on nuclear restrictions, maritime security, and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. In a lengthy statement on Truth Social, Trump said Iran must agree never to possess a nuclear weapon and insisted that the Strait of Hormuz be immediately reopened to unrestricted shipping traffic without tolls in either direction. Trump also claimed that naval mines in the strategic waterway had been removed or detonated, adding that remaining mines would be cleared in coordination with Iran. He further stated that enriched nuclear material buried underground after previous U.S. B-2 bomber strikes would be recovered and destroyed jointly by the United States, Iran, and the International Atomic Energy Agency. The U.S. president said no money would be exchanged until further notice and indicated that additional terms had also been agreed upon. Mr. Dargahi, with regards to the mines, as far as them being cleared up, there has been no signal that this was supposed to be done earlier in the week. What's your take on whether or not this is really the case?
I wouldn't take any of the details that Trump posted seriously. I think that he is basically trying to manage expectations. I think that there's a lot of, I don't know how else to say this, but a lot of bogus in his comments. But I think that I would take the tone seriously. I would say that it's a more diplomatic tone, and that's probably a good sign. His commentary is subject to interpretation on various levels. Iran must do that. Iran must commit not to having a nuclear weapon. Well, you know when Iran did that, 30 years ago, and in the preamble to the 2015 nuclear deal with the Obama administration, Iran never says it wants a nuclear weapon. So it'll say that no matter what. It says that they don't want it. They say that constantly they don't want a nuclear weapon. So it's an absurd statement in that respect. And then as for the other details, I'm not sure what's happening. He's saying that he's not going to provide any money to Iran. That could just be a fudge against some of the mechanisms that they're possibly discussing, because without any money to Iran, there's no deal. I assure you of that.
In terms of the terms previously mentioned, including the talks of handing over or destroying the uranium stockpile, which is currently in Iran, around 440 kilograms, which is said to have been enriched to up to 60%. How much leverage do the Americans have now in getting the Iranians to hand that over?
Well, I think that the problem is that the Americans think they have leverage. The Iranians say they don't have any leverage. The Americans think that they can pressure Iran via this blockade and economic pressure into giving up this stockpile of enriched uranium. The Iranians say we're willing to negotiate on this stockpile, but only at the end of a deal, when there is a little bit of trust established. Mind you, there are negotiations going on, but there were negotiations going on in June of 2025 as well as February. And at the moment, in the middle of those negotiations, both times the Americans and Israel attacked Iran. And so essentially, the Iranians are on extremely high alert. They don't really trust the Trump administration at all. So they're not going to give up anything for the moment until they get some kind of upfront token of trust and goodwill.
Now, in terms of concessions, which of course have to be made by both sides, how far is the United States willing to take those concessions? Is it willing to negotiate a handover of the nuclear material to a different country, or will it be persistent about the destruction of said nuclear material, or even a direct handover to the United States?
The answer is yes and yes and yes, and no and no and no. I don't think Donald Trump actually cares about what happens to the nuclear dust, as he calls it. I don't think you're dealing with a traditional diplomatic or geopolitical mindset. He just wants to look good on television. He just wants to be able to package whatever comes out of this deal as something that is somewhat of a victory for him. And I don't think he actually cares about the detail. Look at the man. He's a game show host. He's obsessed with setting up these games in front of the White House. He's obsessed with putting his name on a opera house in Washington. This is not a guy who's like looking at the fine points of what sorts of enrichment levels matter, what sorts of centrifuges produce what type of nuclear material, how Iran has a path to a bomb. No, no, no. All he cares about is that he's able to package whatever deal comes out of this as a victory for him, as a victory for Donald Trump, better than what Barack Obama got from the Iranians. I'm going to look great, and I'm going to sell this to my base. Yeah, and I'm going to go down in history as the man who beat that black man. That's all he cares about.
Iran seemed to be pretty persistent when it comes to this, the sanction relief as well. How important is that to Tehran?
I think that is extremely important. I think that's basically the starting point to any really substantive negotiations as far as the Iranians concerned. No pay, no play. If the Iranians don't get some cash out of this, they're not going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And there's a logic to this. Iran has been excluded from the global economy for decades, increasingly. And they don't feel the same pain that the rest of the world feels with the Strait of Hormuz closed. They are experts at sanctions busting, at smuggling, at alternative mechanisms for finance, and so on. And so, as far as the Iranians are concerned, basically the world has excluded it from the global economic agenda and the global economic structures, so they can feel they feel the pain very differently than the rest of the world. And as long as the rest of the world continues to abide by the U.S. sanctions, as long as the rest of the world continues to placate the United States on its demands to put economic pressure on Iran, they can afford to put more economic pressure on the world. So are the Iranians holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage until they get some kind of economic relief? Absolutely. That's exactly what they're doing. They know that's what they're doing. They're controlling their choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, in the same way that the U.S. controls its choke point, the control over the dollar and its hegemony on global markets. So I think that, unless there is some kind of financial compensation, there's not going to be any relief for the rest of the world.
So as you said previously, just staying with you, in terms of Donald Trump, he wants this to look like a win. What options does Donald Trump have now for framing this as a win for the United States?
Well, there could be a deal whereby Qatar or South Korea quietly release some frozen funds that they've held and hands them over to the Iranians without Trump looking like they handed it over. And the Iranians could acquiesce to that and not trumpet the transfer of the funds and so on. But my guess is that they will. They won't do that. They will announce it. They want to destroy the Trump administration. They want to humiliate Donald Trump. And they have much more patience. They can wait more and more. There's a report that just came out from the crisis group in Washington about how the U.S. grossly miscalculated Iran's ability to endure economic pain with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. I suspect that they are, just as the U.S. is playing along with these negotiations, to some extent, a kind of pantomime, so that it can't be blamed if things go bad. I think Iran is doing the same thing. They're willing to go to war again as well. There are certain factions, as a matter of fact, inside Iran who are calling for reigniting the kinetic phase of the conflict. Israel has also stepped up its efforts in Lebanon. Is that linked to what's happening in Iran? Absolutely. And I discussed that as well with NewsX. Take a listen.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has claimed that Israeli forces have crossed Lebanon's Litani River and expanded military operations deeper into Lebanese territory. Mr. Dargahi, when it comes down to this essential negation towards the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, what's your take?
On the one hand, you have this mini occupation of southern Lebanon, and they have been getting hammered by Hezbollah. There has been just daily casualties thanks to the use by Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia militia, of these FPVs, these fiber optic drones that have been just tearing the Israeli defense forces apart. And they have been not only destroying Israeli equipment and killing military personnel, but they've also been videotaping it and putting the videotapes out on social media. It's rather humiliating for the image of prowess and invincibility that Israel wants to project. And so I think that's part of it. They're just very angry and they don't know how to respond because they don't know how to stop this particular strategy. On the other hand, there's another incentive for the Israeli armed forces. This is a red line for Iran. One of the conditions of the ceasefire that Iran has always insisted upon was some kind of settlement, some kind of calm in Lebanon. And by breaching so brazenly the terms of the ceasefire that the U.S. negotiated, they're essentially provoking the Iranians and also sending the message to the Iranians. They're like, look, you can cut whatever deal you want with the United States. You'll still have to deal with us. We will not abide by any deal. As you see, we're not abiding by any deal in Lebanon either. We're not adhering to any norms in Gaza. We're letting our settlers run loose in the West Bank. So you can say what you want and you can do what you want with the Americans, but we're going to do whatever we want, and that may include attacking Iran.
What do you believe the repercussions will be, that there might not be a memorandum of understanding that will be signed?
I think that's a tough one to figure out, whether Iran will take the L on Lebanon, so to speak, and let Israel do what it wants to Hezbollah and cut a deal with the U.S. I have a feeling that it might have something to do with what price the Americans are willing to offer. But also, I think for the Iranians, this is a test for them to see if Trump actually can bring the Israelis in line. And if it can't, then what's the good of signing any kind of agreement? What you might see is the Iranians basically doing what Israel and the United States do, sign this memorandum of understanding, and then just blithely and blatantly ignore it whenever it wants to. So if you're just some dude on the internet or just some political aficionado, you can afford to take whatever copium you want. You can watch Fox News, you can read the New York Post, you can look at your favorite, you can Mark Levin, etc., and you can basically, you can afford to believe whatever BS you need to believe. And that's fine. You know, everyone has an opinion, everyone has an ideological point of view. But if you're in the business of, let's say, advising companies on how to do business in dangerous places, how to not just keep your personnel secure, but also to, for example, make sure your reputation isn't tarnished because you're in bed with some like psychotic company linked to human trafficking or slavery or some kind of regime that is involved in human rights abuses, you really can't afford to just have any opinion on world affairs that you want. You actually have to look at reality. And there's actually a whole sector of the global economy involved in this kind of work where they basically, they can't afford to give, oh yeah, sure, everything is great here. It's so super, super safe in this country. You can go and do business there because I heard it on Fox News. No, they actually have to deal with reality. Those people don't watch Fox News. They generally read like the Financial Times. Not even the Wall Street Journal anymore, unfortunately, is safe from that kind of ideological corruption. So a lot of the people who are involved in this kind of business called risk management advisory services, they have to go on the ground. They have to find alternative sources of research. They have to talk to people like me sometimes. And I get calls occasionally, hey, will you take a small fee if we can grill you about, business or prospects in some country? And one of the people that has risen somewhat in this recent crisis in Iran to the cream of the crop just because of his honest balls and strikes commentary. He doesn't seem to have any ideological investment, but he seems to have like really solid assessments of where we're at and where this war is going, where the Middle East is going. Is this guy just kind of bubbled up to the surface, Brett Erickson. He is the principal of Obsidian Risk Advisory. He's out in Arizona, and we got a hold of him, and I'm talking to him now. Hey, Brett, how you doing? You're from Chicago?
Midwest born and raised, but now out here in Scottsdale, Arizona, so glad to be here with you here today.
Cool, great. I actually grew up in the Chicago area, so I'm a Midwestern kid as well. Homewood Flossmoor High School in the suburbs of Chicago. I saw that you went to DePaul, and I thought, you might have lived in Chicago for a little while at least.
Yeah. Spent some time in Chicago and
cool. Lincoln Park in the house
past week. So
yeah, great. So just in general, what do you think? There's There's talk of a possible peace, and we're recording this on a Friday. I'm probably going to broadcast it on Monday. So there's talk of a peace. In general, this peace could fall apart. The weak markets close, bombs start dropping. But in general, where do you feel? Do you feel like this conflict, this 3-month conflict that has strangled oil markets and other commodities, that has put the global economy into uncertainty, do you think this is winding down at this point?
No, I mean, whether or not we go back to kinetic strikes is still unclear. I mean, it's certainly possible that the Trump administration wants to be able to claim some sort of ability to say that we ended it on our terms and that we're the victors. And it's possible that that turns into a last wave of kinetic strikes. It really seemed like it might this past week, and we ended up not seeing anything all that noteworthy. We have seen some skirmishes over the past few days, but nothing overly significant. But I mean, we're dealing with a memorandum of understanding here. We're not dealing with a permanent end to the war, and that seems to be something that many people are overstating with the current situation we're facing. It's very possible to reach a memorandum of understanding and then, 2, 3, I mean, it's 60 days that they're talking about now before, more negotiations are taking place and the bigger points are addressed. Things can certainly fall apart. It's very clear Iran has the capabilities still available to keep the strait closed or reclose the strait if need be. So in the best case scenario, we're in no means out of the weeds at this point.
Yeah. And what does that mean, not being out of the weeds? Why would, I mean, if you could just spell it out here, why would your clients care one way or the other? Why would international businesses that operate globally, why should they or would they care about whether this, I know it's an obvious kind of answer, why would they care if this issue is resolved or not?
Well, I mean, a big degree of the problem is basically energy wars right now between the global economy and against Iran. And unfortunately, like you said, I mean, I don't have a particular ideological skew to this as much as one is able to say that, but Iran can withstand this much longer than the global economy can. We're losing 12.8 million barrels per day. We're above 1.1 billion barrels lost in total now. And it's going to take time to conduct mine clearing operations. It's going to take time to negotiate this memorandum of understanding still. We then need to get tankers out of the Gulf. We need to get them back into the Gulf. And it's just a long timeline that could extend quite significantly. But the big question, too, that I think a lot of people are having is, okay, once we reach this memorandum of understanding, once the strait opens, how many vessels are going to want to re-enter the Strait of Hormuz after that happens? Because that is every bit as significant of the strait being opened. Yes, we'll have that outflow of the, 2,000 vessels that are sitting there, only some of which are, significant in their size. But once that outflow happens, there has to be inflow for it to actually impact the global economy to a notable degree. There has to be a normalization of traffic. And that seems to be what is very unclear at this point is, okay, once it's opened, does that mean normal traffic, or is there going to need to be a complete and final peace deal and then a waiting period to see if it holds before there's actually normal traffic through the strait?
So there seems to be a lot of fallacies about this conflict and a lot of misunderstandings. You seem to identify them on your X or social media or Twitter account. And I think one of the fallacies that you identified early on was this belief that by promoted by some people online, that this blockade that the U.S. imposed on Iran would necessarily put pressure on Iran and blow up its, Trump said at some point, blow up its oil pipelines. Others were saying, it's going to be 12 days and Iran is going to buckle. Then it became 6 or 7 weeks. And then it became 6 or 7 or 8 months. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, I spotted this. And I was like, I see what you're doing. you're kind of stringing the administration along. These people, they from a think tank called the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, they seem to have a real interest in keeping this war going, and they seem to have or have had the ears of the president. Now, you identified this really early on. I was watching. Why were you able to identify this fallacy, even though you're not a Middle East expert? You're not like a, I imagine you're a bit of an energy expert. You have to be if you're in your line of work. But why were you able to quickly identify this as a psychological operation rather than some kind of expert assessment?
Right. I mean, I think from the onset, there's just a lot of issues